The young musician had always loved music more than anything else in his life. He had grown up in a small town where opportunities were few, and most days, he practiced alone in a room filled with the faint smell of old wood and the quiet hum of the neighborhood outside. Every note he played was a small victory, a way to escape the ordinary and enter a world where sound became emotion. He had learned by listening, by feeling, and by repeating melodies until they felt like part of him. Yet, he had never faced anyone who could truly judge the depth of his talent. When he received the letter from the music academy, a mixture of excitement and fear ran through him. The academy was known for producing some of the finest musicians, and the instructors there were respected, even feared, for their strict standards. He knew that being accepted was already a rare opportunity, and the thought of performing in front of these instructors made his hands sweat and his heart race. He packed his bag carefully, making sure to bring sheet music, a metronome, and the instrument he had spent years mastering. As he entered the grand hall of the academy for the first time, his eyes widened at the sight of polished floors, high ceilings, and rows of instruments neatly arranged along the walls. The sound of footsteps echoed, and every corner seemed alive with the energy of talented students who moved with confidence he did not yet possess. He felt small, almost invisible, as he walked toward the practice rooms, his nerves jangling with every step. The instructor assigned to him that day was known for being harsh and direct. She had a reputation for spotting weaknesses immediately and for pushing students to the brink. When she looked at him, her eyes scanned quickly, not with malice, but with the precision of someone who could see potential and doubt in equal measure. She instructed him to play a particular piece, one that was known for its technical difficulty. The young musician felt a tight knot in his stomach. He had practiced challenging pieces before, but something about this one felt different, heavier, almost impossible. He sat down at the instrument, took a deep breath, and began to play. At first, the notes came out shakily. His fingers stumbled over the keys, and he hesitated at the transitions. He could feel the instructor watching, and every glance seemed to magnify his mistakes. The music did not flow as it usually did when he played alone. Each wrong note echoed like a judgment, and he could hear the soft murmurs of other students in the hall outside. When he finished the first section, the instructor made her assessment aloud, and it felt like a weight pressing down on him. "He can't manage this," she said, her words carrying across the room. The statement was not cruel, but it was firm, and it lingered in the air, as if the room itself had agreed. Hearing this, the young musician felt a wave of self-doubt wash over him. His mind replayed every mistake, every hesitation, and he questioned whether he had the ability to continue. He remembered the countless nights he had spent practicing alone, the hours when his fingers bled from repetition, and he wondered if it had all been in vain. For a moment he considered giving up, packing his bag, and leaving quietly, pretending that this challenge was never meant for him. But deep inside, a small voice whispered that he could not leave. Music had been his companion through loneliness, through struggle, and through joy. It had taught him patience, resilience, and the importance of trying even when success seemed impossible. He took another deep breath and reminded himself that this was not just a test of skill but a test of determination and courage. He began to practice again, slowly this time, breaking the piece into smaller sections. He focused on the transitions that had tripped him up, repeating them over and over until his fingers remembered the movements without thought. He experimented with timing and expression, trying to capture the emotion behind each note rather than just the technical correctness. The instructor watched silently, her expression unreadable. Other students passed by, some glancing with curiosity, others absorbed in their own struggles, but he was aware of none of them. He was only aware of the music and the growing determination to overcome his doubts. As hours passed, he felt a subtle shift. The piece that had seemed impossible began to take shape. Notes that once faltered now flowed with confidence, and the melody carried a sense of emotion he had never managed to express in practice rooms at home. He felt alive in a way that was both exhilarating and frightening. Each mistake became a lesson, each hesitation a stepping stone, and slowly, the knot of fear in his stomach loosened. By the end of the day, the instructor asked him to play the piece one more time from the beginning. He felt the weight of her gaze but did not let it paralyze him. He closed his eyes briefly, remembered the long hours of practice, and began to play. The music poured out of him, not perfectly, but with a sense of honesty and passion that commanded attention. The notes rose and fell with emotion, and for the first time, he felt that the music was truly his own. When he finished, there was a brief silence. He opened his eyes to see the instructor's expression had changed slightly. The words from earlier still hung in the air, but now they seemed less definitive, less final. She nodded slowly, acknowledging the effort and the spark of talent that could not be ignored. The young musician felt a rush of relief and quiet pride. He knew he had not yet mastered the piece, but he had faced his fear, confronted doubt, and found a way to play despite it. That evening, as he walked back to his small room in the academy, he thought about the journey ahead. He knew there would be more challenges, more moments when doubt would creep in, and more instructors who would question his abilities. But he also knew that he had taken the first step toward proving not to others, but to himself, that he could rise above difficulty. The night air was cool against his face, and the distant hum of the city seemed to echo the rhythm of his heartbeat, steady and determined. He sat by the window, instrument in hand, and began to play again, not for anyone else, but for himself. Each note carried the lessons of the day, the struggles and the small victories. The room filled with music, and for the first time he felt a sense of belonging. He realized that talent alone was not enough. Courage, perseverance, and belief in oneself were what allowed a musician to truly shine. In the quiet of the night, he made a promise to himself. No matter what anyone said, no matter how impossible a piece might seem, he would face it head-on. The words "he can't manage this" would no longer define him. Instead, they would serve as a challenge, a reminder that what mattered most was not the doubt of others, but the strength to try and the courage to play beautifully despite fear. And so, with determination in his heart and music flowing through his fingers, he began the next chapter of his journey, unaware of how far his perseverance would take him, but certain that he had taken the most important first step, believing in himself when it mattered most. The young musician woke up the next morning with a lingering mixture of excitement and anxiety. The previous day had been a small victory, yet he knew the real challenge was just beginning. The difficult piece assigned by the instructor was still fresh in his mind, its complexity looming over him like a mountain he had yet to climb. He knew that if he wanted to truly succeed, he had to commit to hours of practice, patience, and careful focus. The academy was a place where talent alone would not be enough. Persistence and courage were just as important. He started his day early, the sun still low in the sky. The city outside was waking slowly, with soft sounds of footsteps, distant voices, and the occasional car horn. He carried his instrument carefully, almost reverently, into the practice room. The wooden floors creaked beneath his feet, and the smell of polished wood and old instruments surrounded him, reminding him that he was in a place where many had come before and struggled, just like he was struggling now. He placed his sheet music on the stand and took a deep breath. Today, he decided, he would focus on the parts of the piece that had caused him the most trouble yesterday. At first, his fingers stumbled, hesitant to follow the complex patterns that demanded precision and speed. Every time he made a mistake, he felt a pang of frustration, but he did not give up. He repeated the measures over and over, sometimes slowly, sometimes trying to push the tempo, searching for a balance between accuracy and feeling. The room was quiet, save for the soft hum of the instrument and his own focused breathing. Hours seemed to pass without notice, the world outside the practice room fading away as he became absorbed in the music. During breaks, he would sit on the edge of the bench, wiping sweat from his forehead and reflecting on his progress. He noticed small improvements. His fingers no longer slipped at certain points, and some of the transitions felt smoother. Yet, he knew that mastery required more than just technical skill. The music needed emotion, expression, and a connection that could not be forced. He began to imagine the story behind each phrase, the rise and fall of emotions that the piece demanded. This mental practice was almost as exhausting as the physical, but he felt it was essential to bring the music to life. The instructor watched from the hallway at intervals, her presence subtle but keenly felt. She did not intervene yet, allowing him space to struggle and grow. Occasionally, she made notes, jotting observations on a clipboard, her expression unreadable. Other students passed by, some curious, some indifferent, but he was lost in his own world. Despite the silent doubts from yesterday, he felt a growing sense of determination, a quiet confidence that he could rise to the challenge if he continued to focus. As the day went on, he began to experiment with dynamics and phrasing, trying to make the music tell a story. He discovered that even a small pause or a slight change in volume could transform a passage from ordinary to expressive. He played sections repeatedly, learning to anticipate the flow rather than just react to the notes. Slowly, he felt a rhythm emerge, something that was both precise and alive, technical yet filled with feeling. His confidence grew, but so did his awareness of how much more there was to perfect. Midday brought fatigue, and his mind began to wander. Doubts crept in like shadows, reminding him of the instructor's words from the day before. He can't manage this. The memory made him tense, but he fought back against the discouragement. He thought of every evening he had spent alone with his instrument, every note practiced until his fingers were sore, every moment when music had been his refuge. Giving up now would betray all of that effort. He closed his eyes, visualizing the piece as a complete story, and returned to the instrument with renewed focus. By the afternoon, he had reached a breakthrough. A passage that had seemed impossible now flowed naturally, and he felt the music moving through him rather than simply being played. His fingers remembered the motions without thought, and his mind could concentrate fully on expression. He began to play the piece from start to finish, not perfectly, but with a sense of cohesion and emotional depth that he had never achieved before. The notes rose and fell with a life of their own, and for the first time he felt a profound connection to the music. During one of his practice sessions, a fellow student peeked into the room, watching silently. The observer could sense the dedication and struggle in every movement. There was no showiness, no pretense, only pure focus and effort. The young musician, unaware of being watched, continued to refine the piece, experimenting with small nuances, adjusting tempo slightly, and emphasizing certain phrases for impact. It was clear that he was learning not just to play, but to communicate through music. Evening came, and he felt the ache of hours spent at the instrument, yet a sense of accomplishment filled him. He had faced frustration, battled doubt, and made real progress. The journey was far from over, but he had begun to understand that mastery would require both persistence and patience. He wrote brief notes in a journal he kept, recording insights, mistakes, and feelings about each section of the piece. This reflection helped him identify weak spots and recognize improvements, a tool that would guide him in the days to come. He realized that the challenge was not just technical. It was personal. Music demanded courage, and the courage to face one's own limitations was the hardest part. Every student in the academy experienced moments of doubt, yet not all chose to persist. He felt a quiet pride that he had confronted his fear rather than retreating from it. With each practice session, he became not only a better musician but also a stronger, more confident person. The instructor made a brief visit in the late evening, watching him play a particularly tricky section. There was no comment, only observation. Yet he could feel her attention, the silent weighing of his effort, his focus, and his progress. That brief presence carried a subtle motivation. He wanted to prove, not to anyone else necessarily, but to himself, that he could rise to the challenge. Each note played under that scrutiny felt like a small triumph. As he packed up his instrument for the night, he felt both tired and exhilarated. The path ahead was still daunting, but he knew he had taken meaningful steps. He had faced struggle, learned from mistakes, and discovered that persistence could bring progress even where talent alone might falter. The words from the instructor were no longer a final judgment but a challenge to rise above. He resolved to continue this way, dedicating himself to practice, reflection, and emotional connection to the music. That night, lying in bed, he thought about the lessons of the day. Success was not instant and mastery was built over time. He understood that frustration and doubt were part of the journey, but perseverance could turn them into growth. He drifted to sleep with the music still alive in his mind, imagining the piece flowing seamlessly, envisioning the day when he could play it beautifully in front of others, confident and unafraid. The young musician had begun to learn a truth that extended beyond the notes and rhythm. That effort, determination, and resilience were as important as skill. Every day of practice, every struggle, and every small victory was shaping him, not just as a musician, but as a person capable of facing challenges, embracing difficulty, and discovering the beauty in persistence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but he was ready to meet them, one note at a time. The days of practice turned into weeks, and the young musician began to notice a mix of progress and fatigue. Each morning, he carried his instrument with a sense of purpose. Yet as the hours passed, exhaustion often settled in like a heavy cloak. The piece still presented challenges, and while some sections now felt natural, others resisted mastery no matter how many times he repeated them. The instructor's earlier words echoed in his mind. He can't manage this. They were not meant to be cruel, yet they lingered, sometimes as a shadow, sometimes as a spark that pushed him forward. One afternoon, after a particularly long session, he sat back and let his hands rest on his lap. The mistakes had been many, the rhythm faltering, and his mind felt clouded with frustration. He had spent hours trying to perfect a difficult section, only to stumble repeatedly. For the first time, he questioned whether he was truly capable of performing this piece at the level he wanted. Doubt gnawed at him, whispering that perhaps the instructor had been right, that some challenges were simply beyond his reach. He closed his eyes and thought back to the days before he had arrived at the academy. Music had always been his refuge, a way to escape the ordinary and find a voice for his emotions. It had carried him through lonely nights, struggles at home, and the uncertainty of life in a small town. Giving up now felt like betraying all of that, yet the fear of failure was powerful and persistent. He sat silently for a long while, feeling the weight of both hope and doubt pressing against him. A friend who had become a quiet source of support visited him later that day. The friend had seen his dedication and knew the struggles he faced. Without speaking harshly or offering advice, the friend simply listened as he expressed his frustration. Sometimes just sharing the weight of doubt was enough to relieve some of the pressure. The friend reminded him gently of how far he had come, how many small victories he had achieved, and how talent was only one part of a larger journey. Encouraged, the young musician felt a spark of determination reignite. That evening, he returned to the practice room, feeling both weary and resolute. He decided to approach the piece differently, breaking it down not just by technical sections but by emotion. Each phrase, each measure, was not simply a sequence of notes, but a sentence in a story he needed to tell. He imagined the audience listening, feeling the music as he felt it. This mental exercise changed something in him. The notes were no longer obstacles but vehicles for expression, and the struggle became part of the journey rather than a sign of defeat. Despite this shift, moments of doubt still returned, sometimes sharply. One night, after a particularly rough session, he considered giving up for a brief moment. The mistakes had been countless, the frustration overwhelming. He remembered the instructor's words, "He can't manage this." And for a moment, the thought of walking away from the challenge seemed tempting. But then he recalled the long nights of practice, the small joys of progress, and the quiet satisfaction of moments when the music flowed naturally. He realized that quitting would deny himself the chance to discover what he was truly capable of. He began to journal his experiences more deliberately. He wrote about the difficulties, the triumphs, the fleeting moments when a section played perfectly, and the times when failure felt absolute. This act of reflection helped him see patterns, understand weaknesses, and recognize progress he might otherwise have overlooked. He realized that mastery was not instant, and that even failures were part of a larger process. With this insight, he felt more prepared to face the challenges, not with fear, but with acceptance and determination. The instructor, meanwhile, continued to observe silently. Occasionally, she made notes or offered brief feedback, but mostly she allowed him to struggle and find his own path. This method was challenging, yet it forced him to confront not only technical difficulties but also internal barriers. The young musician realized that self-doubt was often the hardest opponent. To perform well, he needed not only skill but confidence and mental resilience. He began to practice not just the music, but the ability to stay calm and focused under pressure. There were moments of inspiration as well. Sometimes, when he least expected it, a section would come together perfectly, the rhythm and emotion blending seamlessly. These moments reminded him why he persisted, why he endured fatigue, frustration, and doubt. They were small victories, but they were enough to push him forward. Each one was proof that he could rise above the challenge, that he could manage the piece if he continued to dedicate himself fully. He also began to notice subtle changes in his own mindset. Mistakes no longer felt like failures but as opportunities to learn. Frustration became a signal to slow down, to reassess, and to approach the music with renewed focus. He learned patience in a deeper way, understanding that mastery was gradual, built from consistent effort and reflection. This mental growth was as significant as any technical improvement, and it strengthened him for the challenges ahead. One day, during a particularly intense session, he hit a low point. A section that had been improving suddenly faltered, and he felt a surge of hopelessness. For a brief moment, he questioned why he continued, why he put himself through the struggle. But then he remembered the reason he started, the love for music that had never left him. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and began again, slow at first, careful, attentive. Gradually, the notes began to flow, the music taking shape as it had in earlier successes. The triumph was quiet, almost imperceptible, but deeply satisfying. By the end of the week, he noticed a tangible change. The piece no longer felt like a mountain he could not climb but a path he could navigate with care and persistence. The fear of failure had not disappeared, but it had diminished, replaced by confidence born from repeated effort and small victories. He realized that the journey itself had value, that each moment of struggle contributed to growth and understanding. As he left the practice room one evening, the sky painted with the soft colors of dusk, he felt a sense of quiet pride. He had faced doubt, fatigue, and frustration, and he had continued. He had learned that talent alone was not enough. Courage, perseverance, and self-belief were equally essential. The instructor's words, once heavy with doubt, now served as motivation, a challenge to rise above. In the solitude of his small room, he practiced a final time before bed. The music flowed more freely than ever, filled with emotion, precision, and personal expression. He realized that he was learning to play not just with skill, but with heart, and that this connection was what would make his performance memorable. The nights of doubt were still present, but they no longer controlled him. He had found a way to push through, to turn fear into determination, and to embrace the struggle as part of the process. He fell asleep with the music lingering in his mind, the sound of his instrument echoing in dreams. He knew the challenges ahead would be difficult, that mistakes and doubts would return, yet he felt prepared to meet them. The journey was far from over, but he had learned that moments of doubt did not define his ability. What mattered most was persistence, the courage to continue, and the belief that he could overcome even the toughest obstacles. Through these weeks of struggle, he discovered that resilience and determination were as important as natural talent. He had learned that mastery came not in a single perfect performance but through consistent effort, reflection, and the willingness to face doubt head-on. And as he lay in bed that night, he realized that he was no longer the same musician who had walked into the academy weeks ago. He was stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever challenges the music and life would present next. The day of the recital arrived, and the young musician felt a mixture of excitement, fear, and anticipation. The hall was grand, with high ceilings that carried the echoes of footsteps and whispers. Rows of chairs filled with students, instructors, and families awaited the performance. The atmosphere was thick with expectation, and every movement felt magnified. He carried his instrument carefully, feeling the familiar weight in his hands, both comforting and intimidating at the same time. He had practiced for countless hours, yet now, standing behind the stage curtain, the challenge felt larger than ever. He could see the instructor seated in the front row, her gaze sharp, ready to evaluate every note. Her earlier words, "He can't manage this," flashed in his mind, but he pushed them aside. Those words were no longer a threat. They were a challenge he had trained to meet. He took a deep breath, feeling the rhythm of his heart steady beneath the nerves. This was not just a test of skill, but of courage, patience, and the resilience he had built over the past weeks. As he stepped onto the stage, the audience fell silent. The sudden quiet made him keenly aware of every sound. His own breathing, the faint rustle of programs, the soft clearing of throats. He positioned himself, opened his sheet music, and allowed himself a moment to focus. The first notes came out hesitantly, cautious, testing the ground beneath them. His fingers trembled slightly, but as he continued, a familiar flow began to emerge, the music gradually settling into his control. The middle sections of the piece were the most challenging, demanding technical precision and emotional depth simultaneously. His fingers moved swiftly and carefully, recalling every hour of practice, every lesson learned in the quiet of the practice room. When a tricky passage approached, he slowed slightly, allowing himself to think through the notes and transitions. The music was alive, not mechanical. It told a story of struggle, determination, and hope. Each note was deliberate, carrying the essence of the journey he had endured to reach this moment. He glanced briefly at the instructor, her eyes still sharp, evaluating, yet he did not falter. He had learned that looking for approval could be distracting. Instead, he focused entirely on the music, letting it guide him. The audience seemed to fade into the background. Their presence was acknowledged, but it did not dictate the flow. He played with feeling, adding subtle dynamics, emphasizing phrases, and allowing moments of quiet to contrast with bursts of energy. The piece, once daunting, now felt like an extension of himself, a reflection of the perseverance and heart he had invested. There were moments when mistakes threatened to break his concentration. Fingers slipped, timing faltered, and he felt a brief panic. But he did not stop. He reminded himself that imperfection was part of authenticity. He adjusted in real time, using the very errors as a way to connect more deeply with the music. The audience may not have noticed the tiny flaws, but the emotional honesty of his performance resonated. Each phrase carried a personal truth, a story of struggle and triumph that could be felt beyond technical perfection. As he approached the final section, the crescendo demanded both precision and emotional release. His hands moved faster, yet his focus sharpened. Every note, every pause, and every dynamic change was carefully crafted. The culmination of weeks of practice and moments of doubt converged into a single, flowing expression. The music soared, filling the hall with sound that was both strong and delicate, confident yet tender. He could feel the energy of the room responding, the quiet attentiveness of the audience creating a rhythm that complemented his own. When the last note faded into silence, there was a pause, almost suspended in time. Then, the hall erupted with applause. The young musician's chest swelled with relief, pride, and a sense of accomplishment he had never known before. The applause was not just for technical skill, but for the authenticity and courage of the performance. The instructor remained seated, her expression serious yet subtly transformed. She had witnessed not just a musician playing notes, but a story unfolding, a young artist conquering doubt and embracing expression. He lowered his instrument and took a bow, feeling the eyes of the audience and the acknowledgement of the instructor. The once dreaded words, "He can't manage this," had lost their power. The performance had proven that he could, and more importantly, that he could play with heart, with courage, and with authenticity. The journey had been long and filled with struggle, yet in this moment, he felt that every challenge had been worth it. After the performance, he was approached by fellow students and friends, all offering congratulations and expressing admiration. Some praised his technique, others the emotion he conveyed, but all recognized the dedication behind the music. He felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the hours of practice, reflection, and perseverance had culminated in something meaningful. The applause, the compliments, and even the recognition of the instructor were affirmations. But the true victory lay in his own understanding of what he had achieved. Later, alone in the practice room, he played the piece again without an audience, without expectation. It flowed effortlessly, not because of perfection, but because of the connection he had forged with the music. Each note was a testament to his journey, a reminder of the struggle, the doubts, and the small victories along the way. The music was no longer a challenge to overcome. It was a companion, a means to express every emotion he had experienced. He reflected on the lessons learned from this performance. Talent was important, but courage, perseverance, and the willingness to face fear were equally vital. The Music Academy had tested not only his skill but his character. Through struggle, self-doubt, and relentless practice, he had discovered a deeper truth about himself and his relationship with music. The experience had transformed him, shaping not just his ability to perform, but his resilience and understanding of personal growth. That night, as he rested in his room, he thought about the journey ahead. There would be more pieces, more challenges, and new instructors with their own expectations. Yet he now knew that obstacles could be met, doubts could be overcome, and fear could be transformed into strength. The performance was not an endpoint but a milestone, a sign of what could be achieved with dedication and heart. He felt ready to continue, knowing that the journey of music and life was ongoing, and that each note played was both a challenge and an opportunity. The young musician finally drifted to sleep with a sense of fulfillment. The hall, the applause, the instrument, and even the instructor's skeptical gaze had all contributed to a defining moment in his life. He realized that beauty in performance came not just from technical skill, but from perseverance, courage, and the willingness to express oneself fully. The music would continue to guide him, and he would continue to rise to the challenges that awaited, confident that he could manage even the most daunting pieces and play beautifully while doing so. After the performance, the young musician felt a mixture of relief and wonder. He had faced his fears, challenged his doubts, and stood in front of an audience, playing with a depth of emotion he had only begun to understand. The applause and recognition were gratifying, but what stayed with him most was the realization that he had truly experienced what it meant to persevere, to face difficulty head-on, and to find strength within himself that he had never known before. The instructor approached him quietly, her eyes carrying a mix of scrutiny and respect. She had watched every step of his journey, every moment of doubt, every late-night practice session, and now she acknowledged the effort he had invested. Though she did not speak many words, her nod and faint smile conveyed a recognition that went beyond mere performance. It was an understanding that he had not just played the notes, but had communicated through them, expressing a truth that transcended technical skill. He felt a quiet pride, realizing that the instructor's words from the beginning, "He can't manage this," had transformed from a warning into a milestone, a challenge that he had overcome. After the performance, the young musician felt a mixture of relief and wonder. He had faced his fears, challenged his doubts, and stood in front of an audience, playing with a depth of emotion he had only begun to understand. The applause and recognition were gratifying, but what stayed with him most was the realization that he had truly experienced what it meant to persevere, to face difficulty head-on, and to find strength within himself that he had never known before. The instructor approached him quietly, her eyes carrying a mix of scrutiny and respect. She had watched every step of his journey, every moment of doubt, every late-night practice session, and now she acknowledged the effort he had invested. Though she did not speak many words, her nod and faint smile conveyed a recognition that went beyond mere performance. It was an understanding that he had not just played the notes, but had communicated through them, expressing a truth that transcended technical skill. He felt a quiet pride, realizing that the instructor's words from the beginning, "He can't manage this," had transformed from a warning into a milestone, a challenge that he had overcome. The days that followed were filled with congratulations, encouragement, and reflection. Fellow students approached him with curiosity and admiration, asking about his methods, his preparation, and how he had managed to perform under pressure. Some praised his technical skill, others the emotional resonance of his music. He shared his experiences honestly, describing the long hours of practice, the struggles with self-doubt, and the quiet moments of discovery that had shaped his journey. In these conversations, he realized that sharing the process was as meaningful as the performance itself, that learning and perseverance could inspire others just as much as the music. He returned to his practice room, now with a new perspective. The piece that had once seemed insurmountable no longer held the same power to intimidate. Each note was familiar, each phrase had been explored and expressed, and the music now carried the memory of his journey. He played not for an audience, not for approval, but for the joy and fulfillment that music had always brought him. The hours of struggle and reflection had taught him that the beauty of music lay not only in perfection, but in sincerity, courage, and persistence. As he continued to practice, he reflected on the lessons learned from this experience. Talent was important, but it was not the only ingredient for success. Determination, resilience, and the ability to confront self-doubt were equally vital. He realized that challenges would continue to arise, that each new piece would bring its own set of obstacles and pressures, but he now had the tools and mindset to face them. The journey itself, with its moments of struggle and triumph, had become as important as the destination. He also began to understand the deeper value of failure and imperfection. Mistakes were no longer seen as defeats but as opportunities to learn, to adjust, and to grow. Each error carried insight, each difficulty presented a chance to strengthen both skill and character. He embraced this mindset, finding that it brought a sense of calm and focus even in the face of daunting challenges. The fear that had once threatened to paralyze him was replaced by a quiet confidence, born from experience and perseverance. Over time, the young musician became more attuned not only to his instrument but also to himself. He recognized patterns in his own thinking, moments when doubt crept in, and the ways he could redirect focus and energy to overcome them. The journey of music had become intertwined with personal growth, teaching patience, reflection, and self-belief. Every practice session was both a technical exercise and a lesson in resilience, and he came to value the quiet progress as much as the public acknowledgement. Friends, instructors, and peers noticed the change as well. He carried himself with a quiet confidence, no longer defined solely by skill or talent, but by the strength he had developed through facing challenges. Conversations about music now included discussions about mindset, preparation, and the importance of embracing struggle. The young musician found fulfillment not only in his own growth, but in sharing insights that could help others navigate their own journeys. As weeks passed, he revisited the piece multiple times, each performance or practice session revealing something new. Small nuances, emotional expressions, and technical adjustments became opportunities for deeper exploration. He realized that mastery was not about a single perfect performance but about a continual process of learning, adapting, and connecting with the music on multiple levels. Each note carried the memory of struggle, triumph, and the persistence that had brought him to this point. Looking back, he understood that the journey had been as important as the performance itself. The long nights of practice, the moments of frustration, the repeated failures, and the small breakthroughs had all contributed to a profound understanding of what it meant to grow as a musician and as a person. He had learned that courage was not the absence of fear but the willingness to act despite it, that persistence was the foundation of skill, and that self-belief was essential to overcome challenges. The young musician felt a sense of gratitude for the experience. The instructor's doubt, once intimidating, had become a catalyst for growth. The challenges, mistakes, and moments of uncertainty had shaped him more than any easy success ever could. Music was no longer just a skill or a pastime. It was a reflection of determination, resilience, and the human spirit. He realized that the journey would continue, with new pieces, new instructors, and new challenges, but he felt prepared, confident, and inspired. In the quiet of his practice room one evening, he played the piece once more. The music flowed effortlessly, each note imbued with understanding and emotion. It was a performance not meant for an audience but for himself, a reminder of how far he had come. Every phrase carried the story of effort, courage, and perseverance, and he felt a profound connection to both the music and the journey that had brought him here. The room seemed to vibrate with a quiet satisfaction, a sense of completeness that came not from perfection but from the honesty of expression. He understood now that life and music were deeply connected. Challenges would arise, doubts would surface, and moments of uncertainty would appear. But the way to overcome them was through persistence, reflection, and courage. Each step of the journey was valuable, and the lessons learned along the way were more important than any single moment of success. Music had taught him patience, resilience, and the power of belief, and these lessons would guide him far beyond the stage. Finally, he closed his eyes and let the music linger in his mind, the echoes of every note a reminder of growth, effort, and triumph. He knew that future challenges awaited, but he also knew that he could meet them with determination, courage, and heart. The journey of the young musician had reached a milestone, yet it was only the beginning of a lifelong path of learning, expression, and personal growth. The instructor's doubt had become a motivator, the struggles had become stepping stones, and the music had become a true reflection of the human spirit. He smiled quietly to himself, understanding that he had discovered something far more valuable than any performance. He had discovered the strength to face challenges and play beautifully no matter what.